Hi, my name is Jim Amann. Welcome to Then and Now. We'll be talking about issues that face the state of Connecticut, the history of certain issues, right up to the very minute that we're talking today, to tell you what's going on in the legislature, what's happening with the economy, or important issues like we're going to be talking about today, which is human trafficking. We're hoping to do a four-piece segment on this particular issue because it is so important. And the Connecticut connection can be quite startling. Today I have as a guest the former Miss Connecticut 2006, Heidi Voight, who I also had the pleasure of working with when I was Speaker of the House, and she came and worked for me and actually was the one that introduced me to the whole issue of human trafficking. Her platform was sexual violence, and not only did Heidi help me and educate me on the issues pertaining to women, but she also was one that helped us pass legislation. So I'd like to welcome you, Heidi, and it's great to see you again.
It's great to see you. I can't believe it's been 7 years since we first started talking about these issues.
Well, not only, and I'll tell you that it's amazing how many issues that have been brought to me when I was Speaker or even as a legislator that came from wonderful people like you. And I guess that's part of our job, is to listen. But so many issues that you hear about or read about, but don't really know how they pertain to you. So why don't you tell some of the viewing audience what issues were important to you, and having that opportunity to work for a speaker where you actually took advantage of it, obviously in a good way.
Yeah, well, and first I should say it's a testament to your leadership to have heard so many people, to have listened to their stories, and to have acted upon them. So thank you for that, for hearing me. And you and I knew of each other when I was crowned Miss Connecticut, because of course I was from Milford, Milford girl.
Which was pretty exciting.
Yes, and of course Jim represented Milford up there in Hartford.
Let me ask you the next question. Were you actually the first? Now we're going a little off track here a little bit. Were you the first Miss Connecticut from Milford?
I was.
Oh, that's pretty excellent.
I was. Yeah, so I was quite proud.
Awesome.
And I had a lot of support from the city of Milford, and the mayor at the time, Jim Amann, and also the Milford Rape Crisis Center. They were very strong allies of mine, because my platform within the Miss America program was sexual violence against women. My platform was called Educate, Empower, Eradicate, Stop the Violence. And that was the culmination of a lot of work, a lot of years of work that I had done based on my own personal experience being sexually abused as a child and then sexually assaulted later as a teenager, having to overcome that experience, becoming a state certified sexual assault crisis counselor, which was therapeutic in a way for me to be able to take what I had learned and help others. And so within the Miss America organization, you have to have a community service platform, and naturally that's what I chose.
Oh, you said something there that I caught that I think is so important for maybe a lot of women out there, and men too, but certainly mostly women that were sexually abused, whether they were young or whatever the age it may be, that you were able to overcome that to a point, to a degree, I guess, of standing up and saying, you know what, I'm gonna fight back, and I'm gonna try to see if I can help somebody else. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Absolutely.
How did you find that inner strength to do something like that?
Yeah, I was asked that question a lot, and that was just one piece of the pie. I grew up in an impoverished household, and things were kind of rough for my mother, raising 5 kids on her own in a broken home. And that's another issue you and I worked on, is fatherhood and the impacts there. But we'd been through a lot, and my mother always taught us that if I had given up on myself, and there was a time after the sexual assault that I had kind of gone to a dark place, and I became self-destructive and kind of gave up on my hopes for the future. And there was just a moment where it was just very clear to me that had I given up on myself at that point and become another statistic, that everything that I had suffered through, everything my family had suffered through, all the sacrifices my mother had made to keep our family together would have been in vain, for nothing. And my message as Miss Connecticut was, yes, adversity happens, we're all presented obstacles and challenges in life. Mine may look different from yours, but the point is they're inevitable, but they don't have to define who you are as a person. What other people did to me in my life does not define who I am. And so taking myself back, taking my choices back, and taking Heidi back, empowering myself, was how I catapulted myself to success in my life. And so that was the message I think that I really wanted to share with people as Miss Connecticut. And I was able to do that because I had the ability to go into the schools. I worked with over 10,000 students across the state, and so I really hope that that message resonated.
I imagine it has. I mean, if you really think about what you've done to be that victim, but then to find the courage and the strength to stand up to it, overcome it the best you can, and then to go on to be Miss Connecticut is quite inspiring. So,
but that's what we talk about when we say, you're not a victim, you're a survivor.
Excellent.
You know, that empowerment that happens, you become a survivor. And that's what gave me the courage to come up to Hartford, to talk to people like you, to tell my story in hopes of affecting some positive change.
So why don't we talk about that?
Yeah,
Again,
let's talk about that.
What's really awesome about it is, again, I think also a lot of people think that their voice doesn't matter, that nobody does listen to them, and they're not going to make a difference anyways. So you're obviously proof of standing up and then coming as Miss Connecticut, which we really didn't know each other, except for that you were from Milford, which was exciting for me as speaker to introduce you that day on the floor of the House.
That was opening day, I think.
It was opening day, yeah. That's our then footage. That's what we should have went for. That was pretty neat. But more importantly, that you came as someone that was going to help me, but then of course our friendship grew where you were able to say, Mr. Speaker, are you aware of these issues? So why don't we talk about a few of the issues that we've done together, and then of course we'll segue into the main thing of the human trafficking, which we'll talk about in a later segment also, and what's happened since your first introduction to me on this particular issue.
A lot has happened in 7 years, and to see this bill go through unanimously in the House and Senate is amazing to me, because 7 years ago we were still fighting to raise awareness of these issues and to educate people that this was a major issue that was happening in Connecticut with regards to the human trafficking. But going back in time, the first issue that we worked on together was actually the Compassionate Care for Rape Victims Act. And I was up at the Capitol with the Connecticut Sexual Assault Crisis Services. They brought me in to testify to the Human Services Committee. And what that bill was about was ensuring that rape victims had access to emergency contraception if they wanted it at any hospital that they would be brought to in the state. And so that was, I think, our first meeting on a real heavy issue like that. And there was really a seismic shift, I think, up at the Capitol. I don't want to take credit for any part of that. I just shared my story. But Deb Heinrich, and I think you remember Representative Heinrich, the moment that she shared her personal story of surviving sexual assault, I think that was the turning point really in Hartford. And that bill really gained traction, and then it, as you know, successfully passed.
Well, you should give yourself credit, because again, there's simple things that occur out there, and one of them obviously is when you throw that first rock into the water, you never know where those ripples are going to end up. So by you coming forward, standing up, asking the question, you did ignite that particular flame that started all these things to occur. So again, I think people should understand that you can do that, and you can make a huge difference. And so who knows how many people we helped out there. Maybe we'll never know, but you know that you have been effective. And again, it's that old saying, for every action there's a reaction, and your action causes reaction, and it's been pretty positive. So let's talk about that with Representative Heinrich, and then we had success there. It took, I think, it took a couple of years. We had the first year, and then it kind of grew, that issue, and that bill passed, correct?
That did, yeah, and that was a more contentious issue because there were some elements of religious liberty and whatnot built into that, but ultimately the interest of the victim prevailed, and that bill was successfully passed.
Right.
And then my year as Miss Connecticut was coming to a close, and you approached me and asked if I would come to work for you.
That's right.
I said yes.
Right. Yeah, which was pretty awesome. So tell me, how did we get involved with the next big issue that we got involved in, which was with Bill Cosby's about fatherless homes and the effect of the economy, and also sexual abuse and many other things that occur with, again, very tough growing up in situations just like yourself. Not saying that sexual problems don't have and those sort of things occur, molestation in two-family homes, two-parent homes too, because obviously they do. But certainly the statistics show that fatherless homes really is tough on the economy, tough on children, tough on education, tough on many, many issues. So why don't we talk about that a little bit, then we'll get
Absolutely,
into
Well, there were two priorities that you had kind of set when I came on board. The domestic violence in immigrant communities was something we were really looking into, so I was running that task force for you, and the trafficking issues kind of folded into that. There was already a Trafficking in Persons Council established at the time. I think that was back in 2004. But in 2007, in 2007 is when you gave the charge to really delve into the issue and find out, okay, what services are in place for these victims, and what are we doing to better educate law enforcement about the issue of human trafficking. But with regards to the fatherhood, the task force on fatherhood, which I also worked on, and I think Bruce Morris was the chair. That was definitely a significant issue, and an ongoing one too, that they continue to explore up in Hartford. And we did bring Bill Cosby in because he's been very outspoken on that issue, and I think he really has the ability to, it's kind of like when you're Miss Connecticut, people, I think, listen to you because the Crown is kind of a megaphone for the issue that you're trying to present, and of course you bring in someone like Bill Cosby, and he has your attention, and I think people listen.
That was one hell of a press conference we had with him, and he handled the media extremely well. And
in sunglasses and a hooded sweatshirt.
And a hooded sweatshirt, He was great, and again, very inspirational, and that again, like you said, really made some a good impact up in the legislature, and that we're going to be doing a segment on that probably sometime down the road with Then and Now Connecticut. So we're looking forward to that. So so let's get to the meat of it, human trafficking. So I know we were kind of dancing around it a little bit, and then we finally said, what is this all about? Because quite frankly, to me, and I think to most people, they don't think it's a Connecticut problem.
No, they think of Thailand or Cambodia,
Mexico. They're all different places, but this can't really be going on in America. So why don't we talk about that a little bit, about the reality of what's going on in our country and all over the world.
Well, during my year as Miss Connecticut, obviously I was very outspoken about the issues of sexual violence against women and children, and I got a phone call from a gentleman named Rich LaPutra, and he introduced me to Ray Bechard, who at the time, that was his mission. He was quite literally rescuing girls off the streets from a life of forced prostitution, human trafficking. That really opened my eyes to the existence of the issue in Connecticut, finding out that we were a major pipeline between New York and Boston here in idyllic suburban and urban Connecticut. I mean, I had no idea, and I couldn't fathom, having been victimized myself, the repeated nature of that crime. There's already a stigma shrouding victims of sexual violence to begin with, the fear of not being believed, the fear of being blamed. And then you compound that if you think of someone that has been forced into sexual slavery, the fear of being charged as a criminal. It is such a unique crime in that the victim, there's a legitimate fear that the victim will be held responsible as a criminal for being forced into that act. And so it just affected me on such a deep level, and I had the opportunity to meet some of the young women that Ray had brought in rescued from that life, and I just think there's such a deep connection there, and it was that empathy that I felt that really inspired me to get involved with that.
Well, just think about that. I mean, that's part of the problem. I think we've only really begun in America to address this issue of how deep it really is and how organized it is in many areas. It is becoming, as they've been stating, the new drug.
Yeah.
That many of the gangs and others are making their profits more on prostitution now, especially of young underage women, versus the old trade of selling drugs, or even illegal gun sales, or whatever other things that may be going on out there. In fact, I think it's number 2, if not number 1 in the world right now as far as multi-billion-dollar business. It is the sex trade. It's up there with drugs and with illegal gun sales. So that's how big of a problem it is worldwide. But what I found, the same problem you had when we first discussed is nobody really believes it's here.
Right.
And then the way that the victim is treated, I think they almost kind of like, yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure.
There's a lot of
sure, this
myths.
would happen to you. Yeah,
Right.
sure, you were forced to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that horrible stigma right away, even with our law enforcement, because I think they get tainted also as law enforcement of dealing with these crimes so much that they get hardened by it, and it's the same old story. Someone forced you into it. Sure, you did. And then again, that poor young woman continues to get victimized through the system, through the act itself, and obviously by the pimp or whoever's controlling those actions or forcing those actions. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Do you have any ideas of how we can change that stigma for this young woman that really was forced, whether it was because of food, whether for drugs, whether it was for survival, whether it was for alcohol, whether it was for whatever? How do we try to educate people to understand that these were not really the choices that these young women wanted to make? How do we get rid of that image of this isn't really happening? This is pure prostitution. Nobody forced you. You did it because you wanted to.
I mean, how many times have you heard people say it's the oldest profession in the world? I mean, there's so many myths and stereotypes out there about this, but I would say to someone that was skeptical and in a position of decision making, sit down with one of these girls and look them in the eye and hear their story and hear what they lived through and hear the horrific things that were done to them, and then come back and tell me if you still think that this person was a willing participant in having their humanity ripped away from them over and over and over again. And I just think we need to be telling those stories. We need to continue the awareness and education and outreach. And also we need to continue to engage men in this movement, because all of these issues, domestic violence, sexual violence, human trafficking, I think there's a tendency to lump them together as women's issues. And I take issue with that because I think within that there's an implication that it's up to women to solve the problem, and it's not. It's going to take women and men working together in tandem. And it's also, and Ray can probably speak to this better than I can, but it's prostitution, human trafficking, there's a supply and a demand, and you need to be addressing both sides of that equation there.
Well, thank you so much, Heidi. Believe it or not, the 20 minutes is almost up on the first segment of the show. But I want to first thank you very much for all your work, and I want you to continue what you're doing in your life. You've been an inspiration to a lot of people, especially a lot of young people.
Thank you.
So keep up the great work, and again, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Listen, we just began here. We appreciate Heidi being with us. We're going to be bringing on another guest in a moment, Ray Bechard, who also is an author that wrote the book, The Berlin Turnpike, which has put a magnifying glass on the serious problem here in the state of Connecticut on human trafficking. Again, we thank you for tuning in. We hope that we'll be seeing a lot more of you, and you'll be seeing a lot more of us as we discuss the issues that face Connecticut. And we'll see you in a few. So here with Ray Bechard, the author of The Berlin Turnpike, and certainly one that's been a huge advocate and fighting for the rights of people that have been human trafficked in the state of Connecticut. I think one of the leaders, if not the #1 leader in the state. Ray, can you tell us why you're here today?
Well, it's important right now. Connecticut has an opportunity to be at the cutting edge of human trafficking legislation in the entire United States. The bills we have before the legislature right now are amongst the most comprehensive of all 50 states. We had the most important trial of human trafficking under federal law happened here in Hartford, Connecticut in 2007. First of its kind, a monumental trial, precedent-setting, and really no one's ever heard about it. But that one trial really tells the story of how this crime of commercial sexual exploitation takes place here in the United States. The girls were not born outside the United States. They were not kidnapped. They were from Vermont. They were from New Hampshire. They were from East Hartford High School. And they worked out of motel rooms and on the Silestein Highway and on the Berlin Turnpike. They were sold online. They were sold in the newspapers. So there's so much misconception and myth about this crime and how it takes place, not only in the United States, but here in Connecticut, that this legislation, one, will address the needs of the victims. It'll reduce the demand by stiffening the penalties for johns and pimps, but also we're trying to raise awareness about how this crime works today in the United States, and especially Connecticut.
Can you also tell us exactly, people that are victims, they usually get a criminal record. What happens in this bill that might change that?
Well, unfortunately, many women and men who've been convicted of prostitution crimes, that criminal record follows them throughout their life. Even if they are identified as human trafficking victims later on through a trial, or if they're a witness for another investigation. So we have one young woman, Marie, who's testifying here today, who's clearly a victim of human trafficking, yet she still, under Connecticut law, is seen as a criminal. So this law will address that. She will be able to appear before a judge, and he would be able to expunge her prostitution record with the evidence that she was in fact a victim.
I'm Marie, and I'm a victim of human trafficking, and I'm here in support of Bill 6696. Did I get it right? Or I got the number? And I was coerced into prostitution, working for somebody with no pay. And when I was finally caught, I was caught as a criminal. I was recognized as a victim in the courthouse right away, almost immediately. And but as a victim, there was no help for me. There was no place to put me. There was no one to understand me. So in order to get any kind of help, they had to keep me in the court system as a criminal. So I had gone months and months and months to get the help that I needed. The courts couldn't help me outside of as a victim. They had to help me as a criminal. And then when it was all finally said and done, I was left with this background. And today I'm here to support this because I need to get this off my record. I need it to vanish. Because I don't need the negativity and stigmatism, the negative, how do I say it? Yeah.
Stigma.
Yeah, the stigma.
I think you mentioned during the press conference that one of the major problems, obviously, after the fact that the criminal record doesn't go away, has that been difficult for you to find employment or anything in a normal everyday life, loans, etc., correct?
Yes, I've actually had to just stick to a few different avenues of work because that's the only way I can get work because they don't do background checks. I mean, it's pretty easy to Google someone these days, but if they don't do a background check, I'm pretty safe. But if they do, I'm pretty done.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Marie. Well, hello again, and welcome back to Then and Now Connecticut. We are now going to be talking about the next segment, which is continuing on human trafficking, but more recently. I'm here with Ray Bechard. Ray, as you heard earlier from Miss Connecticut, former Miss Connecticut, Heidi Voight, was one that she worked with in the past, and Heidi is the one that introduced me to Ray. And Ray and I have worked together very well for the last couple of years, working again on human trafficking up in the legislature. He has also, since I met him, came out with a great book called The Berlin Turnpike, which we'll be talking about in a little while, which also there's been a play done on the book here in Hartford. And actually, Ray will be screenwriting a movie based on the book and based on some of the ideas that I have called Project Turnpike, and my first series we're working on is called Silent Cry. So with all that, I'm happy to introduce my friend, author, and also champion for young people, whether they be male or female, that are trapped in human trafficking. So Ray Bechard, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for all the work you've done with us to fight this crime in Connecticut.
Well, thanks, Ray. You know, it's amazing how things happen. I mean, if I never met Heidi, if Heidi didn't get Miss Connecticut, it is just odd how things happen in sequences like that. And then we get introduced. I come to meet you at an event one night, and then we've built a nice relationship from there, which is great. And I'm glad that we've been working hard on this particular issue. And now to the one where we actually have some of my partners on the lobbying firm that are very much involved in it, to the point where they actually went down to Washington for a forum. So it's really been eye-opening for all of us. But why don't we first start, Ray, of what we started with last year in the legislature, 2012, and how you made me aware of it in our office, if you recall, about how easy it was to access this information or to buy a young woman online. Especially on Facebook and other social medias that I think most people, including me, had no idea and was shocked by it. And then what we did prior to that, going up to the legislature with the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. So.
The impetus of all of this was a federal trial, the first of its kind, that took place here in Hartford exactly 5 years ago now, in 2007. And that was the trial of United States versus Dennis Paris. Dennis Paris ran in Hartford what he called an escort service. All of his advertising for his escort service was done in the Hartford Advocate, which is owned by the Hartford Courant, the Tribune Company, which ran escort ads in the back of their newspaper for decades. Now, the Hartford Advocate was mentioned in the trial of Dennis Paris over 60 times. Over and over again, they read what his advertisements were. Now, Dennis Paris, the subject of my book and the trial, that particular piece of adjudication really exemplifies and illustrates very, very well how the crime of commercial sexual exploitation, one of the segments of human trafficking, works in the United States. So that's why I examined that trial. Now, moving ahead, after Dennis was convicted and is now serving 30 years in a federal penitentiary, the Hartford Advocate continued to run these ads for 5 years. And so that's when I came to you and said, is there not something we can do legislatively to put them at risk if they run these ads? And that's what brought us to legislative session 2012 and an act concerning protection of children in escort ads.
Well, it was quite amazing to me first, Ray, when I realized, and you know, someone that read the Advocate for years, especially New Haven Advocate, and actually always enjoyed it because it was always different and odd and different spins. You know, of course, always as a college kid, we always get a kick at the ads in the back and the people that were asking advertising. But certainly, I never realized, and I think again, we figure, you know, prostitution's been around since man, I guess, stood up and walked. That, hey, you know, it's you know, part of society, whatever it is. But I never ever realized until you brought it to my attention that many of those escort services are actually pimping off of young girls under the age of 18. And obviously that bothered me tremendously. Not saying that anybody that's in human trafficking, whether they be under the age of 18 or over the age of 18, that certainly is something that we need to continue to educate with people too. It's not just the underage girls. There's a lot of women in this particular, and men, that are forced into this. They're not. It's not by choice. And I think if you would, if you would talk a little bit more about the social media aspect of it, because I think most parents out there have no clue. I certainly could not believe how quick on Facebook you could get to a page where they were soliciting young women under the age of 18 years old, where I could buy that kid within minutes. So would you please elaborate on that, because it was quite disturbing for me.
Previously, Craigslist was the go-to place for escort advertising in the United States. They had one word on their listing, which was called adult, erotic and then adult, and that was the place to go. Well, they eradicated that on Labor Day of 2010, very quietly just removed it. It was too powerful a tool, though, for both the pimps and the customers, the Johns, to use. Nobody had to walk on the street anymore. Still happens, but weather didn't matter, time of day, time of year. Could be done with total anonymity because of Craigslist and that one section they had. So when they took that down, I knew it had to migrate somewhere else, and it did. One was to Backpage.com, which is just like Craigslist, until recently owned by Village Voice Media. Another was to paid-for advertising sites, and there's a plethora of those, thousands of sites where people can go on. But the other one is Facebook, and this is the one that surprises people. When I was researching my book, I found not only an enormous amount of escort agencies listed on Facebook worldwide, I mean hundreds of thousands of them, but also an incredible amount of child pornography out in the open on Facebook. And this is something we've been fighting for years now, for Facebook to put the resources into these postings and pages that go up all day long. And that's really where the crime takes place now, is online through social networking. And again, people can do it with total anonymity. And at this point in our history, in the history of human trafficking, commercial sexual exploitation, you can go online and very simply make a call and have a girl or boy sent to your house within the hour, just like you would a pizza or Chinese food.
I think that's what's amazing, and I think people really it's so unbelievable, they don't believe it, obviously, but it's existing, happening every single day in Connecticut and all over the United States, obviously all over the world. So why don't we discuss a little bit about what we did by bringing it to the attention of Chairman Fox and the Judiciary.
So last year's legislation, which was specifically aimed at the Hartford Advocate, was a bill that put them at risk if they were to run an ad that exhibited somebody or advertised somebody that was underage. They fought against the bill, but yet it passed unanimously. The governor signed it. It went into effect October 1st, 2012, and by November 1st, 2012, all the Advocate newspapers, with no announcement, with no explanation, pulled all those advertising in their 3 papers permanently. So where they're not connecting the legislation and what we did and what they did, it's interesting that it happened a month apart. So
we know that, again, back to what we said earlier in the first segment, every action has a reaction.
Yeah.
They knew what was going on. We certainly, yourself and I helped, I guess, expose them for what it was, and we basically said, I can't remember if it was me or you, but I think one of us said, I think it was me, now I remember, said that they're no better than the pimp. Obviously, they're receiving revenue knowing what they're advertising.
Yeah.
So what is the difference between the pimp that gets the money or someone that's actually advertising knowing exactly what's going on?
Knowing exactly what's going on.
So, yeah, that was a great success, and I remember when you called to let me know that. And again, we thank you for that effort.
Oh,
it was quite amazing.
It was a good little victory, and they had run these things for 30 years, and there were arguments against it, saying, well, what if they're legitimate escort agencies? I've never heard of one of those. Show me a legitimate escort service where you simply go out to dinner with someone and that's it. That does not exist. Secondly, people, they brought up the argument, well, this will violate First Amendment rights.
Yes.
Theoretically, I don't know. Child exploitation isn't covered by First Amendment rights. Secondly, they were proven by this Dennis Paris trial to be a violation of 13th Amendment rights, the eradication of slavery.
Correct.
So, they didn't have much of an argument there.
Yeah, and I remember that was brought up in the Q&A when we were up there, and I think we did very well. It was quite amazing to me, though. What was amazing to me was that some of those legislators were defending the Hartford Courant. And, of course, if you remember, the Hartford Courant's testimony, and I think I don't know if they had something, an article, an op-ed or something too, but whatever it was.
An op-ed said it was doomed to failure. Yes,
it was just so bizarre that they were standing on First Amendment rights when obviously we brought up the 13th. There was something like the 13th Amendment that we kind of remembered too. And so again, great victory for us. And they knew we weren't going to go away.
Yeah, I think that's they knew. The book mentions it, tells out the whole story. It was kind of undeniable. They knew we weren't going to stop.
If you haven't had a chance to read the Berlin Turnpike, you should, because it does really, again, put a magnifying glass on just a small piece of what's going on here in Connecticut, but it's quite eye-opening, and there's actually a follow-up to this book dealing with Mr. Paris, too, which we'll discuss next. But then, obviously, we knew that this was going to be baby steps. We took our first step last year. Why don't we let everybody know what we accomplished in the now part
this year,
which was another wonderful year for us.
Far more than a baby step. Yes. Last year we just had this one piece of legislation. This year we had a rather large piece of legislation. You know, the Shared Hope International, which is an anti-human trafficking organization, rates the laws in each state and how they're doing against fighting trafficking. They had been giving Connecticut an F, failure, for years, and we wanted to get out of that grade point average. And I think this year we did. We mirrored the federal legislative definition for human trafficking, whereas I don't want to talk too much inside baseball, but it was very difficult to prove under our Connecticut law that someone was guilty of human trafficking. And I'll bring up that other case now as an example. Dennis Paris was tried under federal law, Trafficking Victims Protection Act, put away in federal prison for 30 years. 2 years ago, his younger brother was doing the same thing, same business. Out of the same motels in the Berlin Turnpike and the Sizestein Highway. He was actually more violent and brutal than his brother. He had a partner, his wife, who would take photos of the girls, pose with the girls, and even work as a prostitute. She was also a Connecticut state trooper. So he pleaded, but the federal prosecutors didn't want to take that case. The state prosecutors didn't want to take it as a human trafficking case because the law was so weak, our human trafficking law in Connecticut. So they just convicted him of promoting prostitution. He'll do less than 4 years.
Amazing.
Same crime, in the same family, Connecticut state trooper involved, a 26-year difference in the penalty. So what we did was mirrored the federal statute that defines human trafficking as force or fraud or coercion used in the commitment of this crime. That's one part of it, strong part of it. The part that meant so much to me, because you and I both know Marie, a survivor of human trafficking. Now, she was arrested for prostitution, even though she was a victim. And as Heidi was saying before, these victims are treated as criminals under the law. With our second chance law that was just passed and signed by the governor, Marie will now be able to go before a judge and say, here's what happened to me. And that prostitution arrest, she will be able to have expunged from her record. Because that follows her wherever she goes. She applies for a job, a bank loan, anything, and there it sits. And they have one thing in their mindset about what it is, whereas she was actually a victim of this crime, and her story is in the book as well.
And I think that's really a great point to elaborate on a little bit more, because, you know, we all know the reality of the world, that there are kids that are just good kids to get involved in this human trafficking. There's damaged kids to get involved, and for their lives, because once they're in and trapped and actually are victims of human slavery and sex trafficking, it's going to be tough enough for them when they're out to try to just deal with themselves, then try to be back in society, and then of course always getting that slap back in the face where, well, you know,
they can't get beyond it.
You can't get beyond it, and even society will look down on them, even though they were forced. So,
and that's why she had so much courage to get up there last year and this year before everyone and say, this is what happened to me. Even with that stigma, she knew it was coming. But the issues that these people face after they get out of the life, drugs, drug addiction, criminal records, financial problems, emotional problems,
Sure.
it's you know, and there's very few services for them. So,
Right. So
that was just two parts of the legislation. The other one that I was adamant about was increasing the penalty for Johns, the customers, because without addressing the demand side of this market, you cannot get rid of the market itself. So we decided that let's increase the penalty for a John if he solicits a prostitute, pays for sex with a prostitute, that is a human trafficking victim. That would be it's now a Class C felony. So it makes it much stronger. It's much more risky for that John to solicit a prostitute, not knowing what her circumstances are. He can be actually looking at some very serious jail time now. So it increases his risk. Maybe it'll give him pause and turn away from this.
Well, we certainly hope so, Ray, and we're going to continue to again shine the light on this horrific problem here in the United States, especially here in Connecticut. We only have a couple minutes left. Why don't we go into briefly about the play that came out of this, which was extremely interesting, and then obviously where we are right now, what you and I are collaborating on, and then we'll close it up for today.
The Heartbeat Ensemble, which is a wonderful, socially oriented and culturally oriented theater group here in Hartford, Connecticut, approached me about 2 years ago, just as the book was coming out, and said, we'd really like to do a play about this. And I said, okay, sure, absolutely, it'd be wonderful. And I didn't hear from anybody for months, and sometimes people come to you and approach. Well, all of a sudden they came back to me about a year ago and said, oh, we're ready to do our first reading. And you went to one of those readings at the Hartford Public Library last year, and it was terrific.
Yes.
And they said, okay, we'll be premiering this in 2013, which they did back in April. And it was absolutely fantastic. They really hit the mark with illustrating what victims go through in a dramatic presentation live on stage in the area of human trafficking. The way the pimp influences, the way the motivations they go through, the difficulties they have. It was no holds barred. They really told the truth, and I was very, very pleased that they did. And they'll be doing the play again in the future.
Excellent. And then you and I now, you're my screenwriter, and we're hopefully to start shooting this year on Project Turnpike.
I hope it's this year.
Well, it's getting there. It's getting there.
This is such a complex story that it really takes a number of sequential TV episodes to really tell it. A movie isn't enough time to develop the characters, their motivations, what they go through, the complexities of it. And I'm glad you've made the decision with LA Productions to make a series of this, to really tell the stories of these characters, how they're drawn in, get rid of the myths and misconceptions, get people to care about these victims so that they finally have a voice and are listened to as human beings.
Right. Well, it's going to be exciting, Ray, and we're going to continue this fight for who knows how long, but appreciate you being here today. Again, thank you for all your hard work. Well, that kind of wraps it up for our first Then and Now in Connecticut. I hope you enjoyed it. This is one of a 4-segment show we'll be doing on human trafficking. I think we might have Ray back at the wrap-up on our 4th show. We're thinking about that right now. But again, we hope that you tune in. We'll give you some information at the end of the show about Ray's book and how you can get that. And certainly call-in information how you can talk to me and other guests in the future. So again, thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.
wonder why. Answers the call. Do they run? Do they laugh like other children do? Oh, sit and cry and wonder why they can't go home. Silent cry. Silent cry. wonder why